Once upon a time, in the beautiful village called Uduma. The village of Uduma was full of joy. People were singing, dancing, and cooking delicious food. Everyone was happy because Adana was going to marry Obinna the next day. Adana was the most beautiful girl in the village. She had dark skin that shined in the sun, bright eyes, and a sweet smile. Obinna was strong and kind. They had loved each other since they were children, and now, they were finally going to be husband and wife. The old men of the village sat under the big Iroko tree, watching the wedding preparations. "This is a wedding blessed by the gods," they said, nodding their heads. The whole village was excited. But Adana's grandmother, Mama Nena, was not smiling. She looked worried. A strange feeling. Adana sat inside her mother's hut, looking at her beautiful wedding beads. Her friends were outside, laughing and talking, but she felt uneasy. She should be happy. Tomorrow was her big day. But deep inside, she felt afraid. She didn't know why. Suddenly, Mama Nena walked into the hut. She was an old woman with gray hair and wise eyes. She sat beside Adana and held her hand. "My child," she said in a low voice, "I must tell you something important." Adana frowned. "What is it, Mama?" Mama Nena took a deep breath. Then she said, "You cannot marry Obinna." Adana's heart stopped. "What?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Mama, the wedding is tomorrow." Mama Nena held her hand tightly. "There is a curse in our family, Adana. A very old curse. No woman in our family has ever had a happy marriage. Some die on their wedding night. Others bring bad luck to their husbands." Adana shook her head. "No, Mama. That's just an old story." Mama Nena's face was serious. "That's what my sister said before she died on her wedding night." Adana's hands shook. She wanted to believe it was just a story. But why did Mama Nena look so scared? "What should I do?" she whispered. Mama Nena's eyes filled with tears. "You must run away before it's too late." The shadow in the night. That night, Adana lay in bed, wide awake. She kept thinking about what Mama Nena had said. Was the curse real? Should she run away? Then, she heard a whisper outside her window. Her body froze. Slowly, she sat up and looked outside. A dark figure stood near the trees. Its red eyes glowed in the night. Adana gasped. She wanted to scream, but she could not move. The shadow did not move either. It just stood there, watching her. Then, a soft, cold voice whispered in the wind. "You cannot escape your fate, Adana." A strong wind blew, and her candle went out. The room became completely dark. Adana could not move. She sat in the dark room, her heart beating fast. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow outside her window was gone. Had she imagined it? Slowly, she reached for her lantern and lit it. The small flame flickered, making the room glow softly. Everything looked normal. But deep inside, Adana knew, something was not right. Morning comes. When the sun rose, the village was already busy. Women were cooking, men were decorating, and children were playing. Today was supposed to be a happy day, her wedding day. Adana stepped outside her hut, trying to forget about the shadow. Maybe it was just a bad dream. But then, she saw something at her door. A small clay pot sat on the ground. Her heart skipped a beat. Carefully, she bent down and touched it. As soon as her fingers touched the pot, it cracked open. Inside was a piece of cloth with something written on it. Adana slowly picked it up and read the words. If you marry him, you will not live to see the morning. Her hands shook. Her breath became fast. Who left this? Was it the shadow? She looked around, but everyone was busy with wedding preparations. Nobody was watching her. Running to Obinna. She ran straight to Obinna's house. She found him outside, laughing with his brothers. When he saw her, he smiled. Adana, you are up early. Is everything okay? She didn't answer. She just held out the note. Obinna took it, read the words, and his smile disappeared. Who gave you this? He asked. His voice was serious now. I don't know, Adana whispered. I found it outside my hut. Obinna frowned. Someone is trying to scare you. Adana's eyes filled with tears. My grandmother says there is a curse on my family. She says I must not marry you. Obinna looked at her for a long time. Then he shook his head. Adana, do you believe in this curse? She wanted to say no. But after what had happened last night, after the note, she wasn't sure anymore. Obinna took her hands. I don't believe in curses. I believe in us. We have loved each other since we were children. Nothing will come between us. His words were strong. His eyes were full of love. Adana wanted to believe him. But deep inside, she was still afraid. Mema Nena's final warning. Later that afternoon, Mema Nena called Adana into her hut. My child, she said, her voice low and shaky. You saw it, didn't you? Adana froze. Saw what? Mema Nena sighed. The shadow. Adana's blood turned cold. How do you know? She whispered. Mema Nena looked at her with sad eyes. Because it came for me too, long ago. Adana's heart pounded. Mema Nena grabbed her wrist. Adana, you must run away before it is too late. Adana pulled her hand back. No, Mema. I love Obinna. I will not run. Mema Nena's eyes filled with tears. Then prepare yourself. Because once the sun sets tonight, you will belong to them. The wedding begins. The drums started beating. The whole village gathered under the big Iroko tree, where the wedding was to take place. Adana wore a beautiful red and gold wrapper, with beads in her hair. She looked like a queen. Obinna stood tall, waiting for her. His smile was full of love. But Adana felt uneasy. Was the shadow watching? Would something happen? She shook off the fear. Today was her day of happiness. The village elder lifted his staff and began the marriage rites. Adana, do you take Obinna as your husband? Adana smiled. Yes, I do. The crowd cheered. The elder turned to Obinna. Obinna, do you take Adana as your wife? Obinna grinned. Yes, I do. More cheers. More drums. Everything was perfect. Until the sky changed. A sudden darkness. The sun disappeared. A cold wind blew through the village. The drums stopped. The people froze. Then, a deep scary voice filled the air. She belongs to me. Adana's heart stopped. The ground shook. The trees moved. Then, from the shadows, the red-eyed figure appeared. The villagers screamed. Mema Nena cried. The shadow pointed at Adana. Your time is up. The wind blew harder. The trees shook. The ground rumbled. The red-eyed shadow stood in front of everyone. People screamed and ran. Some hid behind trees, others fell to the ground, shaking with fear. Mema Nena held her chest and whispered, It has come. Adana's heart pounded. She could not move. The shadow pointed at her. She belongs to me. Obinna stepped in front of Adana. His hands were fists. His face was angry. No. You will not take her, he shouted. The shadow laughed in a deep, scary voice. You are too weak to stop me, it said. Obinna did not move. I will protect Adana. The shadow tilted its head. You love her? It asked. With all my heart, Obinna said. The shadow smiled, but it was a wicked smile. Then, let us see if love can save her. The shadow raised its hand. A strong wind lifted Obinna into the air. Adana screamed. Put him down, she cried. The shadow threw Obinna across the ground. Obinna groaned in pain. Adana ran to him, tears in her eyes. She held his face. Obinna, are you okay? Obinna tried to sit up but was too weak. The shadow laughed again. You see? No one can stop me. Mama Nena's plea. Mama Nena fell to her knees. Please, have mercy, she begged. The shadow turned to her. Mercy, it said. Did your ancestor show mercy when she broke her promise to the river goddess? The crowd gasped. Adana's eyes widened. What promise? She whispered. The shadow stepped closer. Long ago, a woman from your family made a deal with the river goddess, Uhamiri. But she broke her word. Adana felt dizzy. She was warned, the shadow said. But she did not listen. So the goddess cursed every daughter in her bloodline. The villagers whispered among themselves. Adana felt sick. The curse was real. The shadow looked at Adana again. It is time, it said. Come with me, and I will spare your people. Adana froze. She looked at the villagers, their faces full of fear. She looked at Mama Nena, who was crying. She looked at Obinna, who was hurt but still trying to stand. No, Obinna said, his voice weak. You don't have to go. The shadow smiled wickedly. If she does not come, then I will take everything she loves. The wind grew stronger. The sky turned darker. Lightning flashed across the sky. Adana had to choose. Would she go with the shadow? Or would she fight for her love? The wind howled. The trees bent. The ground shook. The red-eyed shadow stood tall, waiting. The people of the village watched in fear. Mama Nena sobbed. Obinna tried to stand, but he was too weak. The shadow pointed at Adana. Come with me, or I will take everything you love. Adana's heart raced. She had to make a choice. Would she go with the shadow? Or would she stay and fight? Adana looked at Obinna. His eyes were filled with love, but also fear. She knew he wanted her to stay. She knew he would fight for her. But what if the shadow hurt him again? She looked at Mama Nena, who shook her head. My child, she whispered, don't do this. Adana closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. Then she turned to the shadow. I will come with you. Gasps filled the air. Obinna shouted. No. You don't have to do this. Adana felt tears in her eyes. I have to, she whispered. She walked forward, step by step, towards the shadow. Obinna grabbed her hand. Please, he said. Don't leave me. Adana held his face. I love you, she whispered. Then she let go of his hand. Obinna fell to his knees, crying. The shadow smiled. You have made the right choice, it said. It raised its hand, and a dark mist wrapped around Adana. She felt cold. She felt weak. She felt herself being pulled away. The last thing she saw was Obinna's face. Then, everything went black. When Adana opened her eyes, she was no longer in the village. She was standing in water, but her feet did not sink. The river stretched far and wide, shining like silver. The air was cold, and the sky was dark. Then, she heard a soft voice. You finally understand your fate. Adana turned around. A beautiful woman stood before her, wearing a dress made of flowing water. Her eyes glowed like the moon. She was Uhamiri, the river goddess. Adana stood still. Her feet touched the cold water, but she did not sink. The sky above was dark, and the air felt heavy. She looked at the beautiful woman in front of her. The woman's dress moved like flowing water. Her eyes glowed like the moon. Adana knew who she was. She was Uhamiri, the river goddess. Uhamiri tilted her head. "You finally understand your fate," she said softly. Adana's heart pounded. She felt afraid but also angry. "Why have you cursed my family?" she asked. Uhamiri watched her closely. "Long ago," she said, "one of your ancestors made a promise to me. But she broke it." Adana's eyes widened. "What promise?" Uhamiri stepped closer. "She was a young woman, just like you. She came to my river and begged for love." Adana listened carefully. "She swore that if I gave her a husband, she would offer me her first daughter." Adana felt her blood turn cold. "She got her husband," Uhamiri continued. "She had a daughter. But when it was time to keep her promise, she ran away." Adana's hands shook. "She thought she could trick a goddess," Uhamiri said. "So I cursed her and every daughter after her." Adana felt sick. It was never her fault. It was never Mama Nena's fault. It was all because of one broken promise. Adana looked up. She gathered her courage. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Uhamiri smiled slowly. "I want what was promised to me," she said. "A life." Adana's heart sank. She understood. She had two choices. Number 1, stay in the river forever and end the curse. Number 2, refuse, and let the curse continue for her sisters, her daughters, and every girl in her family. Make your choice. Adana thought about Obina. She thought about her love for him. She thought about her future daughters. She knew what she had to do. She lifted her chin. "I will stay," she said. Uhamiri's eyes flashed. The river began to glow. The sky rumbled. Adana felt herself sinking into the water. She closed her eyes. Then, everything went silent. Adana sank into the water. It was cold but did not feel like drowning. She could breathe. She could see. The water around her glowed with a strange light. She felt like she was floating between two worlds, the land of the living and the world of the gods. This is not the end of this story. Stay glued to this channel for the next episode. Subscribe, share, like, and comment.